Hey everyone, I'm going to try and do another penetration test with the box of magazines I got. This time I'm going to try the 12 gauge Federal 3-inch 1¼ ounce slug. I've already done a whole bunch of tests with it, so there's definitely a lot of holes and damage in these magazines already, so I want to try and place the slug somewhere that doesn't have any damage so the penetration isn't like compromised. So it looks like the best spot to shoot is pretty much right here. So I'm going to try and place the slug right around here where it seems like there's not much damage. I'm going to be shooting from about 5 yards away with the Winchester Model 1300 Defender. Alright, so we had an entry right about where I wanted it. It looks like the wadding went through with the slug since there's 2 holes. And it's by far the biggest hole in diameter, obviously. 72 caliber about. Let's see where the slug stopped at now and how much damage it did on its way through. I'm just going to pull out the first 10, which is exactly where the 22 Aguila Interceptor stopped, and it looks like the next 3 want to come out with it. I can't just pull those because they're stuck together. And there's the back of the 13th one, I believe, and that's where the slug came out. These 2 holes here are from the Mauser, so that's where the 8mm Mauser came through. And that's where the Federal 3-inch slug came through. Let's go ahead and just look through all of them one at a time, starting at the first one, just to see the damage that the slug did on its way through here. So here's the very first magazine. That's where the slug entered. Just so you guys can compare it with the slug, I'll go ahead and say what all these other ones are too. This one here was the 45 ACP. This was the 32 ACP. This was the 22 long rifle. This was the 22 long rifle Aguila Interceptor. Then right here was the 8mm Mauser 154 grain Romanian surplus round. Right here we had the 9mm Federal 115 grain FMJ. Right here was the 8mm Mauser S&B 196 grain FMJ. And this one up top was the 9mm Winchester 115 grain FMJ. Now that we got all that out of the way, let's finally go ahead and take a look at the damage here. So the slug and the wad went through right there. Only one exit on the back really, the wad must have just pushed through. And here's the second magazine. Slug went through right there, the biggest hole. And here's the exits. And here's the third magazine. The slug hole looks like it's getting bigger, as well as all the other holes obviously, since we're getting expansion now that it's penetrating through. And here's a chunk of lead just sitting here on the table. That must be a fragment from the slug. But anyways, here's the back of the third magazine where the slug blew through right here. Here's magazine number 4, entrance hole. I don't know if you can tell, but right around the edges of the entrance hole there's some sort of like powder. I think it's lead. That slug must have been really soft, so It looks like there's lead powder on the magazine here. And there's lead fragments coming out too. So it was definitely breaking apart already on magazine number 4. There's the exit on the 4th magazine. This was the slug here. Here's a more up close look at what looked like the powder along the entrance hole there from the slug. Some sort of powder there, most likely from the slug. Now here's magazine number 5, and wow, look at that hole now. All the holes from all the penetration tests are getting pretty big now, but most of them stop pretty soon, so we shouldn't get too mixed up in the damages. But here's where the slug went through, that just massive hole in the center there. And there's where it blew out with all kinds of damage. Magazine particles falling out everywhere. Here's magazine number 6. This is where the 32 ACP stopped on its magazine. And the slug blew through right there. There's not much left of its magazine. It's pretty much torn apart now. So, just massive holes. The slug blew through right here. And here's the 7th magazine. This is where the first 22 long rifle stopped, the standard high velocity round. So here's where the slug blew through, still just doing devastating amounts of damage where the 22 stopped. And the 22 obviously just poked a tiny hole through that's deep, while the slug blew that's massive 2.5 inch wide hole almost. So there's the exit on magazine 7 from the slug. Here's magazine number 8. As I said, there's not many other holes now because a lot of the bullets are beginning to stop now. So there's where the slug blew through. Still just a massive hole. Out the back too, obviously. Here's magazine number 8. And there's the wadding stuck right there. Let's just go ahead and pull that out. So there's the wadding. It was stuck here in magazine number 8 in the center of its massive hole. I think this is where the 45 ACP stopped on that same magazine. And that's where the slug blew through. There's the exit. Here's magazine number 9. The slug still blowing a massive hole through. The only other things that made it this far was the Aguila Interceptor, which stopped on its magazine. This was where the Aguila Interceptor 22 stopped. Both Mausers made it through and the 9. So everything else stopped by now. There's where the slug blew through the back of magazine number 9. Just a massive hole still. These two small holes down here, that's where the Mauser came through. So the 8mm Mauser, both rounds, still just a small bullet-sized hole on the exit on magazine 9, while there's the 12-gauge slugs hole. Pretty big difference. There's the entrance on number 10, the two 8mm Mauser holes, pin-sized holes, and then the slug entrance. Exits on number 10. Slug hole's almost 3 inches wide here, it looks like. Just devastating damage. And here's magazine 11, and this is where the 9mm stopped. So the only thing that made it past this magazine was the two 8mm Mausers, these small entries, and now the 12-gauge slug. So nothing else made it this far. The 12-gauge slug penetrates through more magazines than anything else so far but the Mauser. There's where they all went through. The small Mauser exits here and here, and the giant 12-gauge slug exit right there. So here's magazine 13, which is the last one I pulled out, and the slug hole doesn't look as destructive now, but it's still a massive 2.5, possibly 3-inch wide hole here. And then there's the two 8mm Mauser holes there next to it that are still really small. And the exits, magazine 13. The slug's probably starting to slow down significantly now. That's why the magazine isn't being torn apart as much. It's just getting pushed through, it looks like now. Instead of just blowing all that's through, it's just pushing through or blowing all that out. Now let's pull out the next few magazines. It looks like the slug didn't keep penetrating, but it had so much momentum that it bent a bunch of magazines behind where it stopped. Because see, there's just a huge bulge here. All the magazines got pushed back with such force that they're just bent now. So let's see if we can find where exactly the slug stopped in there though. Okay, so here's magazine 14. The only holes gone through now, as I've stated numerous times, is the two 8mm Mausers and its 12-gauge slug, which now seems to be slowing down. There's the exits. And here's magazine 15. Still a huge exit on the 12-gauge slug, while the Mausers are still just bullet-sized holes, haven't even begun to expand yet. Here's magazine 16. Lots of magazine particles falling out, and these two are stuck together for some reason. But there's the entries. One of the Mausers looks like it's starting to expand a little or break apart. That was the S&B 196 grain FMJ. There's the Romanian surplus still just poking through, and then the 12-gauge slug with its huge, now about 3-inch wide or 3-inch around hole blowing through there. And here's magazine 17. The Mauser expanding slightly more, and the slug still just blowing through. Same size hole, 3-inch wide, maybe even bigger now. You guys should be able to tell better in the video. So there's magazine 17, and a lead fragment just fell out. A small piece of lead, obviously part of the slug. Put that aside. So there's the exits. Magazine 18. The slug's still blowing through, so it's got quite a bit of impressive penetration, and now a whole bunch of lead fragments are falling out into my hand. So the slug definitely broke apart as expected, and it looks like a lot of its lead fragments got caught around here, around magazine 18 or 20. But let's keep looking. So there's the entrance on 18, the exit. Here's magazine 19. You can see a piece of lead stuck in it right there, so small lead fragments all over, so it broke apart into tiny pieces too. I mean, there's more lead fragments, magazine particles coming out. I'll try to scavenge up all the lead pieces and see the remains of it. So there's magazine 19. Romanian surplus, still a small hole, S&B opening up a little. And the 12-gauge slug, just a massive, devastating hole. And the exit. Here's magazine 20, and it looks like I can see the majority of the lead slug right there, all mangled up. A couple more magazines back. Let's go ahead and look through, see what happens. There's the exit on 20. Entrance on 21, and there's a huge hunk of lead. It's not hot anymore because it's been a few minutes since I shot it, but wow, look at that slug. That's the remains of it on magazine 21. But it still blew through and did damage to the rest. We'll take a look at those in a second. I'll set this slug aside for now. So here's the damage on magazine 21. The Mausers came through here, and the slug is just now beginning to stop, but still putting a massive hole through the magazines. Here's magazine 22. It took a fat split from the slug. Like I said, the momentum still just punched them so hard that it cavitated or encaved these magazines pretty much. See, it's all dented now. These were still flat up until now. Now there's just a huge dent. So that's where the slug stopped. There's no cut or hole on the next magazine from the slug, just a massive dent. So the energy and momentum of the slug didn't stop right here, just the physical mass of it. So it didn't cut any deeper, but it still pushed a lot of force through. So there's the last magazine. I believe it's magazine 22. There's where the two Mausers went through, and the slug stopped right here. But it looks like the slug did the encaving effect for at least the next 10 magazines. You can see right there, look at that. It's just dented right there. They should be straight. So yeah, a lot of force from the 12 gauge slug. So anyways, there's all the magazine particles that fell out from the ones we looked at. And here's the stack that the slug went through. I believe it's 21 or 22. It stopped on the 22nd one right here with the last split. Although the energy pushed through quite a few more. But here's all the particles that fell out. And there's probably lots of lead fragments mixed in. Yeah, I can see one there, another little one there. So lots of small lead fragments that broke apart. But let's take one look at the remains of all the slug and the wadding that was retrieved. Okay, so here's what was recovered from all that mess. Here's the majority of the slug that was caught in the 21st magazine, I believe. All mangled up into an awkward shape. And there's magazine particles stuck to it. I don't know if you can see, but up there in the cracks and stuff. And then there were all these little tiny lead fragments recovered also, plus the wadding, which was caught in one of the magazines. So those are the major remains found from the 12 gauge 3-inch Federal 1 1/4 ounce slug, which went through 21 magazines. That's all. Thanks for watching.